1 o'clock, and here you are here at the Birmingham Museum with myself, Leslie Pielack. I'm the director, Donna Casaceli, museum staff. And each week we have a theme that we discuss that relates to Birmingham's history and some usually kind of cool stuff that we figure out about it. However, today we're going to be talking about something everyone has experienced in Southeast Michigan in the last few days, which is water. Our theme is water, and I was telling Donna earlier that I think my sub-theme for it is remember, water always runs downhill, because that seems to apply to all the stories we're going to tell you about water in Birmingham. The water is really important in the founding of any community, and in the pioneer period, Birmingham was no different. And the Rouge River was the river system that was across the Saginaw Trail, so it was the first significant water system that pioneers found. They had to cross, coming up from Detroit, they had to cross the Red Run, which was a lot of flooded and low stream kind of stuff. So it's not the first water they would have encountered, but they needed to know about water for one excellent reason, not the one you're thinking of, not because they needed it to drink to live. No. The more important reason was they needed to find out, could they put a mill on the water source? And if they could, that would help ensure the prosperity of their community. And lo and behold, as they come out of the swamps in the Royal Oak area and come up onto the relatively higher land of what is now Birmingham, they encounter this lovely river, which got named Rouge, meaning red, which is red in French. And that is because the river actually doesn't start up here in Birmingham at all, and it drains down into Detroit. So many years earlier it had been named by the French for the red color of the water. Not blood, by the way, which is another urban legend. Okay, so back to the Rouge River in Birmingham. When they encountered the river here, they found a river that was similar to what we have now, but a little different too, because it was a faster river. It had a greater volume of water, and it immediately spoke to mills. So the Rouge River became one of the most important landscape features that determined that Birmingham would be settled here. Let's see, I have a cheat sheet. I want to make sure I haven't forgotten anything. So Donna has more she's going to say about the water system, the surface water system around here. But keeping in mind that the Rouge River we see now is slower, it's had a lot of reduction in the water volume because for various reasons the water has been channeled off by farms further up the course of the river. The river is a fairly good-sized river system, and as I said, all of the different branches come together and then it actually becomes a sizable river and drains down into Detroit. And one of the fun stories that I can tell you about the Rouge River in the settlement period is that the early exploration of the Saginaw Trail involved a couple of attempts in October of 1819 by people out of Detroit who were trying to find land that they could invest in. I'm not talking about John West Hunter and John Hamilton and Elijah Willits. Actually, I'm talking about sort of these entrepreneurial folks who wanted to find good land. And they came up the trail without a scout and without any leadership, and they didn't know where they were going. And they wandered around, and somewhere in, we think, the Royal Oak area, they got lost. And so they eventually found their way around. They discovered a branch of the Rouge River, and aha, they knew how to get home. So they had to follow the Rouge River for miles and miles and miles and miles out of their way at night in the cold to get all the way back to Detroit. They actually came out again on another foray, but they learned their lesson and they brought a guide next time. So with that story, I'm going to shoot it over to Donna.
So a lot of people think of the Rouge River as one river. But the truth is the Rouge River makes up a huge watershed. It's called the Rouge River Watershed. And one of the things that I found out when we wanted to kind of look into Quarton Lake, which is the big lake here in Birmingham, and how it kind of became Quarton Lake from a mill pond. And everything I read in Birmingham said that it came off the Rouge River. But I'm looking at the Rouge River and it nowhere connects to Quarton Lake. Well, it turns out that the Rouge River doesn't connect to Quarton Lake, but one of the Rouge River drains. So what is a drain? It's not something that was built. It's a waterway, a stream, or some type of river that empties into or drains into another river. So the Rouge River makes up over 427 square miles of waterways, and it's all a watershed because it all eventually comes and drains into the Rouge River. So, but each of these waterways has its own name. Each of these waterways is not called the Rouge River. It's not the West Branch, the East Branch, the North Branch. And actually what empties into and makes Quarton Lake is the Sunken Bridge Drain, which actually starts on the opposite side. So where the Rouge River starts off in Rochester Hills, this starts off in the west side of West Bloomfield. And it actually was quite a large waterway system of its own, quite a large stream of its own, because it actually has several mills on it too. Quarton Lake was not the first mill pond. The first mill pond was actually at Cranbrook, but it wasn't Cranbrook at the time. It was owned by Morris, William Morris, and he would construct the first mill on Sunken Bridge Drain in 1828. And of course, when you build a mill, you have to have a mill race, which is narrowing that stream into a way that it can run that big water wheel.
Right.
And so he would be the first one to what's called impound the waterway. So it's basically constricted to the point that it has to flow fast. And this would create what would become later Kingswood Lake. The Booth family buying the land in the early 1900s would actually put a water gate at the top of the Sunken Bridge Drain where the mill pond was starting, and they would block it with a second gate, and that would create the Japanese gardens there. But the mill race still exists on Cranbrook property, so you can actually still go down and see the mill race. Now the mill itself burned in 1889, but the Booths rebuilt a new mill in 1939. Not really a functioning mill, just sort of more just for fun. But that's Bloomfield Mill. So if you were getting flour in Bloomfield Township before it burned down, that's where you went, to the mill on the mill pond.
So our Quarton Lake was known as Mill Pond in Birmingham for years and years. So it was actually downstream.
It was downstream. And then that one would actually have its first mill put on in 1833, which was a sawmill. A very dirty enterprise. And just a few years later, in 35, Mr. Young, who built the sawmill, would sell it to Mr. Merrill, who would put the flouring mill.
And is this Roswell T. Merrill?
This is,
okay.
Yes, Roswell T. Merrill. And he would rearrange the dam in the mill race to build the mill that we see all those pictures of.
It's kind of interesting that water power was really important in 1820 and in 1830, but almost within a few years, steam became a way of powering mills.
Right.
So most sawmills actually became steam operations.
Right.
They still need to be located near woods though. So it makes total sense to me that the forest was gone by that point around Quarton Lake, what's now Quarton Lake, but people needed a place to mill their flour. So it was basically repurposed into a flour mill, which was also commonly done.
And so that's still not the only mill.
There's
Sunken Bridge Drain. So you've probably heard of Endicott Lake and Endicott Farm, but it was originally owned by a William Smith, and we actually have have a picture of them constructing the mill and it's, the picture on the back says water-powered mill, William Smith, later known as Endicott Farm. So you can kind of see where they're starting to try and build that mill race to get that water going. And even if they transferred over to steam, they still needed water. You know, they still needed that water to go into the steam engines to run it. So, but the problem is, and a lot of people, when they think of Mill Pond, it was used as a swimming hole, and they would cut the ice, and we see these pictures of the ice houses and everything. It was filthy.
It was polluted.
Horribly polluted. As a matter of fact, there would be many outbreaks of typhoid in Birmingham, and it wouldn't really be till germ theory, the idea that these germs were waterborne. Sewage lines would empty right into the Rouge River and into the sunken bridge drain. These mills would pump out, especially sawmills, were very dirty. They added pollutants into the water. If you've got a steam engine, you're burning all of that wood. And so when you look at these pictures, you're like, oh, it was so tranquil before all the houses. It was also so very dirty.
In fact, we've got oral histories of people who were children in the latter part of the 19th century, like in the 1880s and 1890s. And when they talk about the Mill Pond and the Rouge River, what they remember distinctly, even into their later age, is how bad it smelled and how polluted the water was, and how their mothers said, don't you dare go in that water under any circumstances, even though kids still are attracted by water. So, and then on top of that, at least in the middle 19th century, Birmingham had a couple of small manufactories. In other words, like a tannery. Guess what happens with all the awful, pollution from a tannery? It goes usually into the local stream because they don't want to keep it around the tannery or the settlement. They want it going somewhere else.
And Birmingham was not at the top of the Rouge River.
So we're talking about it as a waterway, but maybe that you should take that in quotes, water. It was really polluted water.
Yeah, and the thing is that they had this idea that dilution is the solution to pollution.
Love that.
And so they were thinking, well, rivers automatically clean themselves because, well, the Rouge River and the sunken bridge drain are both spring fed. Underneath Birmingham, we have underground rivers that were channeled during the glacier period. And those spring up under pressure, and that's where we get our artesian wells or our springs that feed a lot of these rivers that come above ground.
Right.
But they're still carrying all the pollutants. So when we think of Birmingham's, mill, the reason why I wanted to point out the mills above it is because you have these settlements above, and they're dumping their trash, and they're dumping their waste, and they're dumping their sewage, thinking that, well, it'll just,
it goes away.
It'll dilute, and so it won't be bad. But then you have all of these other little areas and these farms and these communities dumping, and Birmingham is not the top. So you're getting all this pollution in Mill Pond, and that's going to lead to the reason why people had to dig wells.
Yeah, and then that's another problem because people would dig their wells kind of pretty much in their backyard. Why? Because there was a lot of water under
those
ground that was easy to get to, all the
rivers.
springs.
Yeah.
And so all I have to do is sink a well in. And the fact that my privy is 10 feet away from this shallow well, that brings in Martha Baldwin, which is a completely other story, but it all comes back to water and how well people understood or didn't, in this case, failed to understand what was happening in the water. And the germ theory, something you can't see, that can really make you very, very ill.
But moving away from illness, wellness. How does water bring into wellness? Well, while looking and researching and everything, I kept coming across the fact that Birmingham was trying to become a mineral bath center. And I'm like, where are these mineral baths? And finally found an article from 1955 that somebody, a wonderful woman by Ruth Ann Silbar, did all the research for me. Because she was able to get newspapers that we no longer are capable of getting, all the way back to 1878 Birmingham and Centers, which we don't have. So it was kind of nice to run across this. But apparently in 1870, George Opdyke was digging for a well for drinking water.
Wait, Opdyke as an Opdyke Road.
As an Opdyke Road.
Sorry, just had to ask that.
And he pulled up the water and it tasted horrible. But a couple enterprising people were like, oh, well, this could mean mineral springs. And so they had the water tested and it came back as being very full of minerals. And immediately, Birmingham became enthused over this discovery, and Opdyke built a bathhouse near the spring. And the spring was right next to the mill, so it was on the northwest corner of where the bridge is and Maple Road. So right where the Rouge River goes under Maple Road.
Which is just west of here.
Yes, I walked it yesterday, and it took me about 6 minutes to get there for a leisurely pace. And so there was bathhouses, and people would come from Detroit and Illinois and Ohio, as far away from these places, and take in the baths. And according to the Birmingham Eccentric in 1878, the baths were spouting to the height of 10 to 12 feet above the surface. The water was spouting 10 to 12 feet high, and it comes, quote unquote, direct from God's never-failing laboratory, charged with the choicest medical properties, which are supplied so lavishly by an all-wise creator for the healing of his children. So,
well, there's an advertisement there.
Wow.
Oh my gosh. Well, so if it was spouting 10 feet in the air, that sounds like an artesian well.
Yes.
An artesian well, all that really means is that the water source is under so much pressure that once an opening is found above ground, the pressure brings the water up in a spout or a spurt. But we also have springs that are sitting springs, don't we?
Yes. And a couple of those were also capped. And there was one on the south side of West Maple near the bridge. And that one was actually founded in 1887 on land belonging to Edwin Baldwin. But what was interesting is that this would go on to be where people would come from Detroit and fill up jugs of water from the DUR. It was finally capped in the 1940s. And one last quote, and then I'm going to hand it over. The fire chief, Park Smith, said that he poo-pooed the idea of its having miraculous healing properties, saying it was basically just a mild laxative. And they capped it because it had just pretty much kind of dried out. So these wells were so fast and so hard spouting that they just got right. So, but we have one here on site.
We do, but before I get into our site here, keep in mind that the evolution of use of water changed with what was going on in the area. So in the late 19th century, people were watering their cows in the Rouge River, and all of that was going on. So where all these baths were, some of these wells were, is also some of the lowest area where all of the surface runoff was going. That is the foundation for the problem that happened when the Allens came here to this beautiful site, built this house in 1926, and lo and behold, below them, down the hill, was a natural spring-fed pond. And actually Mr. Clisby, who had owned the property before them, Marion's father, had tried his hand at raising trout there. So there was a concrete wall or a weir type dam in the water feature, which allowed water to just come over like in a little kind of a square opening at the top of the wall. So the water would very carefully spillover, and trout were raised there. Well, when the Allens moved here, they said, a swimming hole. This is made to be a swimming hole. So they added a little bit more concrete and they improved it a little bit more in 1926 and turned it into a swimming hole for their kids. Their son Jim and their daughter Peg and their friends went leaping and splashing into this pool. Remember, I was saying the pool is below the Allen house. It's like quite a ways below. There's quite a steep slope there. And it turns out that that water feature, not only did it involve spring-fed water, but it also involved surface water that was washing off the streets and from the sewers of the little village of Birmingham into that area. Shortly after going swimming in there in August of 1926, Jim Allen unfortunately contracted poliomyelitis. He was the only child in Birmingham at the time anyway who was identified with it. The other children who were swimming did not get polio. However, it was determined or believed that he was exposed to polio swimming, which was a common concern at the time of parents, with good reason, because polio, which is in our environment all the time, is waterborne also. Most of the time we are exposed to the polio virus when we're so young that it doesn't have much impact on us, so we develop antibodies. But for whatever reason, Jim Allen had not. And so he unfortunately developed poliomyelitis in 1926, and he was affected by it all his life. We still have the pool down on our property. It has some invasives that have moved in, but it's very clear. You can see that the edges, and next time you are on the site or you go by on Blitz Avenue, you can see the squared off edges of the former trout pond that became a swimming pool, but once Jim contracted polio, no one was permitted to go in it again, and it actually fell into disuse. And now you can see that it has water in it, but it doesn't look like it did when they had enlarged it into a swimming pool. One more thing to say about that swimming pool history, by the way. Swimming pools, like we think of them now, became a backyard feature in the 1950s and 60s. The pool that the Allens built for their son was really the first private swimming pool that I was able to find anywhere online. There was a public one that was built even after that in a large park down south. So, one more Birmingham first, unfortunately had terrible consequences. So we talked about some of the waterways in Birmingham. Next week, join us for Facebook Live, where we hope to have an artifact short featuring Caitlin Donnelly. And join us tomorrow, Friday, if you can, between 1 and 4, where our pop-up exhibit, which explores women's history and the National Archives program that we're also featuring. And stop by and talk to us about some pretty amazing women in Birmingham's history, especially politics.
Yeah, we are open tomorrow for the pop-up, even though we have tons of road construction. So if we can get here, so can you. All right. Thank you for joining us. Bye.
Bye.